Thanks everyone for joining. We are very excited to kick off our inaugural media panel. We are going to be talking about how to break into the COVID-19 news cycle. Obviously, COVID-19 starting in March has made many changes to the way that we live, the way that we work. It's also made changes to the way that earned media is done as well. So we wanted to spend some time with the journalists that we have on the line today, really talking about how the environment has shifted, what they're watching, paying attention to, and the best ways to incite them with the stories that you have to tell. The folks on the line today, a lot of them clients of PAN or folks from our network who are a part of the communications teams or executive teams at our at technology companies, B2B technology and healthcare companies. So first and foremost, I want to introduce everyone we've got on the line today. I will leave Alex for last for now. But first and foremost here, we've got Jim O'Donnell, who's a news writer for TechTarget. Say hi to everyone.
Hey, everybody.
Also, he's a contributor to Search Manufacturing ERP as well as Search SAP for TechTarget. Prior to that, he was a freelance technology writer, writing about IBM, specifically in enterprise applications for Penton Media and IDG. So we're super excited to have you on the line today, Jim. Looking forward to your insights, really around the customers that you talk to on a regular basis and what you're seeing happening, in the industries that you cover. Also on the line today is JP Ruth, who is a senior writer for InformationWeek. He did mention to me earlier as we were getting on the line that he's located out in New Jersey and had previously been the editor for Xconomy and looking at the New York tech startup scene. He's also been an investor and freelancer for The Street and other publications. So we're super excited to have you on the line with us, JP, as well today.
Glad to be here.
So lastly, we have Alex Wilhelm. So still looks like we're having a little bit of challenge here, but I'm going to introduce him and then hopefully we'll be able to get his audio back on. But Alex is the senior editor at TechCrunch. He writes their Exchange newsletter. We're really excited to have him on the line today as he's got some really great insight into the technology sector as he covers founders as well as IPOs and deals that are happening in the technology sector. So he was formerly the editor at Crunchbase News as well. So thanks so much, Alex, again, for being on the line, Jim and JP.
Thanks.
Glad to be here.
Good to be here.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, we'll get started with Jim and JP while we get Alex back on the line here. But, I think first and foremost, just wanted to kind of kick us off with a few general questions that we wanted to look at during the session. And, they are really just, at a high level, how has COVID changed the earned media, landscape, if at all, in your experience as journalists? Certainly, we've seen some changes from, the communications PR side of this equation. What are the trends that are new and that you're most interested in covering? What are some of those topics you think you're going to be looking at next, kind of into the future? And then, obviously a question for a lot of the folks on the line today, how can brands break through, to you? So a lot of these company communications leaders, looking to get in front of you and tell their story. So what are some of the best ways they can do that? So with that, I would love for you guys to just jump in on the first question. Just how have things changed for you since March?
I'll start. I mean, I'm working from home, which is definitely different, but as far as actually the way the work has gone, it's changed very little. When I was in my office or when I'm here in my home office, I'm doing everything by phone or, I'd say obviously there's more Zoom meetings and that kind of thing, more of the, the stuff we're doing now. But as far as just like the actual, the work itself, it has not really changed that much at all for me.
Okay.
Yeah, likewise, the mechanics of the job hasn't changed that much. I mean, I was already working from home as it is. There's obviously, no in-person meetings, no going to conferences, that kind of thing to see the debut of X. But the mechanics of the job haven't changed. It's been a reprioritization of the topics, the drive, what the readers are looking for, and what we need to convey and get across to them.
I would
All
say,
right.
speaking on that, the lack of conferences, that has been a very big change, I think, for me personally, because there was always I didn't go to as many conferences as I'd probably go to 4 or 5 a year, but they were big and they were a really good source of making personal contacts and sort of getting customer stories, which is always what we want, rather than just talking to the vendors. And so there's a lot of that that's not there anymore, and that's noticeable. It's a noticeable change.
Yeah, I think a lot of our clients are exploring more virtual event opportunities as well to make sure that that connection point still exists between their customers and you, and that you guys are getting that firsthand experience with the technology and the folks who are using it as end users. I think that one of the things that we were really interested in hearing from you guys as well is, obviously COVID-19 has changed the way that a lot of businesses are approaching their business models, the products they're putting out into the world. Just in general, are you hearing from customers or IT leaders, about new innovation trends? Like, what are some of the big innovations that you're seeing coming through as you're covering, these companies?
JP, you want to go first? Or?
Sure. Looking at things related to the cloud, there's been areas going beyond just the sake of migration to the cloud, talking about how robotics, edge computing, different issues that come up with beyond just for the sake of getting on cloud, how you go about monitoring, what's going on. I think there was that initial conversation of we have to get there, but there was that quickly moved to the all right, now we're in this playground of the cloud. How do we make the most of it? What are we really going to do with this going beyond the initial break-in moment and move forward with that?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that for enterprise systems, there's been a cloud sort of movement for quite a while, and I think COVID has kind of accelerated the pace for some companies, but for some that might have budget issues that they didn't have before, they might have started to pull back on some of those. But there's definitely been a trend. In particular, I cover a lot of SAP. And they've been trying to get their customers to move to S/4HANA, which is their new sort of their modern ERP system. It's cloud-based. It's got a lot of sort of advanced analytics and things like this, automation. So a lot of their customers have sort of seen the value of having more of that and that intelligence into their core systems. So some of them have been accelerating projects that might have been, sort of nice to have, but not must have. So they're moving into that category, whereas others, I can't commit to such a large sort of investment in their core systems at this point. So it does vary.
Just as a test, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen, never click the mute button by accident if you're about to sneeze before a thing starts, because you will lose all of your ability to talk out loud. I'm really sorry for that. On the innovation trends thing, I've been spending a lot of time looking at kind of the injection of AI into the broader SaaS market, trying to figure out what's become table stakes, what's actually differentiated, what people actually care about as a user. And I've been digging a bit more deeply into the no-code/low-code world as much as I can. I haven't actually written code since high school, so I'm pretty out of date, frankly. But I think the idea that we're going to build software systems that allow more regular folks to create applications of different levels of complexity is pretty exciting. And then, I cover a lot of kind of consumer fintechy stuff. So there's innovation stuff in that area, but it's less directional and it's more specific to the application in question. So those are two things that I have my eyes on as I try to figure out kind of this new world that we live in. It's been pretty shaken up in the last 6 months about what people kind of want and need. But those are two things that kind of stand out for right away.
Yeah, and I'd say from my point of view, COVID has really changed the supply chain market in general. So we're seeing a lot of interest in things like supply chain visibility, supply chain automation, getting it intelligent into supply chain, that people can sort of see more, in real time or near real time where things are, but also kind of introducing analytics into those systems so they can get more predictive and kind of see where, should you be sourcing your products here where there might be issues coming up. So there's all that, supply chain is a huge thing that companies are interested in now.
Yeah, adding on that, I keep hearing real time come up in all different types of contexts, not just supply chain, not just people building fintech applications for companies. Just real time as a concept seems to have become even more important. And I think that's because we're all a bit more desperate to go faster in the current world. And I thought real time as a trend was over like 10 years ago, but it seems to have really picked up in the last 6 to 8 months. I don't know if that's a new thing that I'm just noticing or kind of new in general, but I have noticed that recently. This one's to me. Alex, one thing that jumps out to us and is so interesting is how active the IPO market is right now. What are your thoughts on that? Surprising or no? What are you watching? Well, Monday kicked me right in the backside. If you weren't on Twitter that day, essentially every company in the world filed to go public sequentially. And it was also Y Combinator's demo day, so it wasn't busy at all. I think what we're seeing is that a lot of companies were at IPO scale, but were holding off going public because they didn't need to. But then the public markets were so warm and so attractive for so long that they finally jumped in. And I think they did so now because we're a bit post the Q2 earnings cycle. People kind of know where valuations are going to land. There has been demonstrated interest from public shareholders to buy kind of growth-oriented shares still. And so people are going public. Varying levels of quality. Palantir is a mess. Asana is okay. JFrog looks great. I just kind of ranking them by order of quality. But it's been super fascinating for me just to kind of finally get my hands into these numbers that I've been looking forward to for a long time. I think we're going to see a lot more in the next 3 to 5 months if things stay where they are. So it should be pretty active for the exit cycle for kind of later stage startups. I love that topic. Sorry that was too fast, but it's a really, really fun space to watch. Jim, you want to grab that next one?
How should we be weighing the political landscape of the U.S.? Well, that remains to be seen. There's a lot that's going to happen. I think there's a lot of uncertainty for a lot of people right now to kind of. So there might be some technology investments are maybe going to wait to be implemented until after November when things maybe settle down. I know there's some issues like AI in HR, things like that, and facial recognition, things like that, where depending on which side of the political spectrum you're at, that one party might be more for it or more against it. So I think people are just waiting to see how things shake out and settle down from there.
Especially regarding China, there's been a pretty long narrative about kind of China versus the U.S. and the AI world, as if there's no other countries with data scientists and other kind of developers. But I think both parties actually are going to be pretty harsh on China and China's tech push. So I think in that area, at least, there might be some harmony. But Jim, I do agree on the election being kind of a turning point for a lot of other stuff inside the AI space. JP, you want to jump in on that, or should I grab us the next cue?
Let's grab the next one, the one that we missed.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, how should early stage startups, B2B SaaS, think about breaking into the news cycle to tell their story? What do you look for when assessing? Speaking of that personally, the stories that I work on for Information Week, we are speaking to largely enterprise scale organizations. So when startups work into our mix, it's usually from the perspective of discussing how they have been working with enterprise clientele, how their innovations, how their technology, whatever it is, where their platform is or app is, how that has been used in the wild. I personally focus on use cases where I'll want to talk to not only the one who's developing and producing, this whatever it is, the software, the app platform. Definitely, I need to speak with that enterprise client that's making use of it, so we can share for our readers how that's actually operating in the world. Because we don't really do like reviews or here's the new whatever. We don't kind of just talk about products when they're just kind of appearing, we really need to put it in the context of how it's actually being used, so our readers can get that sense of whether or not it relates to their issue, does it speak to something that's comparable to them, how, even if they don't directly make use of that particular startup's innovation, how that concept might relate to some of their issues that they're thinking about at least.
Yeah, I'll chime in there too. I totally agree with that. That's our TechTarget, not just my sites, but any of the TechTarget sites. If you're a startup or a smaller company, you have to have a customer. You have to have somebody that we can talk to. We don't ever just talk about a vendor that doesn't have somebody that's actually using the technology. So.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that as well, because I think it hits all three of us. When I think about B2B SaaS startups, especially on the earlier stage, I'm very curious about kind of what recent growth metrics they have. I have more of a financial focus than a kind of enterprise market focus, just given TC's more startup-y in general, different kind of audience than I think JP has, which is perfectly fine, just different focuses. And so I really care the most about companies that are growing the fastest, because they have the chance to have the largest market impact, I think, as they get older. And with SaaS companies in particular, we're all pretty familiar with kind of SaaS financial metrics. So it's not hard to ask relatively probing questions of these companies. And then, how to break into the news cycle is to be pretty open. I think most startups, most private companies tend to be super walled off, super kind of like, we're not going to share any metrics. And then you hear things like, well, we don't have to share, we're private. And I'm like, great, I don't have to give a shit. There's a lot of companies. So if you don't want to tell me things, then why are we even doing this? People even try to pitch funding rounds that don't have a dollar amount, which to me is just mind blowing. Yeah, and then they're like, well, we don't want to share. And I'm like, well, I mean, dear Lord, there's 24 hours in a day. Why did you want 12 more minutes? So I think growth metrics are exciting. Openness is intriguing. And, having a CEO who's willing to riff versus want to give you kind of a delivered package of thoughts over the phone is always a good sign. I'll jump back on the phone with certain people if they're interesting. More often than I will with people who are boring. So I would avoid overly media training executives, especially at the early stages of startups' growth.
I just want to add one quick thing. And I've got a soft spot for startups, since I spent a considerable amount of time when I was covering the New York startup scene, seeing them grow. And one of the things I always, at the time thought was that made the New York startup scene stand out from the broader landscape was the aspect of it that focused on enterprise and the fintech scene. With that, there's some tough love that needs to happen, where we don't want to, just talk about the lofty ideas, which kind of we're all collectively saying that's cute, but we need to see the grit and where it's actually, the rubber not only meets the road, but how far down the road you're going with this. Making that real tangible connection is really key.
Before we move on to Richard's question, I want to grab MK's follow-up, which is kind of what metrics do you want companies to share? There are some basic ones, like how many people do you have? How fast are you hiring? Where are you going to deploy new capital if you raised it? Are you looking to acquire other companies? That's kind of all table stakes. The more fun stuff is how fast did your recurring revenue grow in the last 12 months? Are you ahead of plan for the calendar year? Are you seeing gross margin improvement or erosion? And these are relatively, again, probing questions, but they really help tell you about a company and its merits and its strength and quality and financial health, which is what I am trying to get to. There's any number of companies that raise a dollar amount from some VC you've heard of every day. That's not impressive, nor does it kind of stick out. It's the companies that are willing to share more that really grab my attention. So specific financial growth metrics is kind of my favorite thing. But again, that's just me. It's one person's perspective. It's not everyone's view.
Financial metrics aren't as much of a focus for us, for our outlet. It's more about understanding the scale of what they can do with their innovation. Get a number of times where somebody will present their platform or app, what have you, and it's a novel idea, but if it can't speak to a certain scale for readership, then it doesn't have as much relevance. So at least giving us some kind of sense of the reach it can have. Maybe they hopefully, in an ideal world, they can point to a specific client that can immediately relate to the readers. Oh, okay, great, big mega corporations making use of it. They've got locations around half the world. Obviously, it can work for us. If they don't have that specifically, if they can at least kind of frame how it can, and it can expand to those needs. There are a lot of ideas that are great that speak to specific niche markets. Just for us at Information Week, we definitely need to have that sense of this innovation can speak to that kind of organization that is operating in multiple time zones, hemispheres, climes in real time sometimes.
Jim, where does TechTarget land in all this?
On what specifically?
Well, what JP just said about companies and how much in-market reach they can have, is that kind of the similar perspective that you guys have when you think about which companies kind of matter?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just speaking personally, like I don't deal as much with sort of the startup that you might, because I cover more established enterprise companies, the SAPs, Oracles, even some of the smaller sort of mid-range. So if there's a smaller startup that's within that segment, I'll I may listen to what they say, but they kind of have to be sort of more established. They do have to show some credibility as a business, and but as far as like the financials, that's not really what what we deal with, what I deal with anyway. Other sites have different different standards and different things that they're looking for.
Yeah. Jim, do you want to take a swing at Richard's question that he has there?
In terms of new innovations in marketing, what are the likely growth areas and comms channels that should benefit? In new innovations, I'm not sure what the, I don't know what he's getting at it in terms of innovations in marketing or innovations in the technology. I don't know.
JP, do you have an idea there?
Hang on, I'm just scrolling a little bit so we can get a better look at the actual question.
MK, if you have a translation for us on that one, that would not be amiss. While we're thinking about that, I'll grab her follow-up about customer acquisition versus retention. This is, again, kind of a financial metric, so I know it's more specific to me, so I'll keep it brief. But I love all of that stuff. Net dollar retention, gross churn, all those kind of metrics are super fun. Again, because you get kind of under the skin of a company, which tells you a lot more than a slick line from a VC or a customer, as JP was pointing out. It really tells you kind of like the resulting performance of the business, and that's what I care about the most when I'm trying to vet who's interesting and who's going to be a company that I'm going to cover for the next 5 years, not just 5 minutes.
I will speak to, I think it's Earl, as a journalist, do you ever attend webinars hosted by business for background info on industry or business, or do you technically connect straight with sources? Yeah, I would certainly attend, webinar for background. For the most part, we do want to connect directly with sources, at least I do, that have, customer stories. But yeah, if there's a tech or a company that's particularly interesting to me, and they're hosting some sort of webinar, I would consider it for sure.
I'm on the other side of that one. I'm relatively webinar phobic because they tend to be slightly higher level. And I tend to, if you can get the CEO of a company, you can go a little bit deeper faster. And I think the issue that we all have is time and trying to get the most information in the least time possible, because there's fewer journalists than before and there's more news. So there's kind of a natural time bias against us in that area. JP, next question is for you from MK. If you want to grab that one.
Sure. Let's talk about trends you are seeing. What are you specifically looking at? What do you anticipate will be focused on and following in the next 3 to 6 months? In terms of just like kind of the broad trend that I think we're all kind of looking at is how organizations are moving forward into their next phases of this mid to late stages of the pandemic, and how that they're operating, continuing to go forward. That's kind of like the broad brush. More nuanced, looking at, I cover cloud computing and DevOps, and within that, cloud computing, seeing a lot of discussions on how robotics, or like I said, edge computing, how that ties into cloud computing, how cloud computing can really enable those things. Talking about tiny machine learning, because the devices at the edge. We know what qualifies as a robot. It might not be something that, that's a big powerhouse kind of a thing. If there are ways to, kind of like shrink down that compute to match these devices or these endpoints that might not be as, powerful as a laptop or even a tablet, what can be done in the cloud that can make those things work and create potentially a broader ecosystem, the cloud. I mean, those are some of the, larger trends that I'm watching. I mean, there are a few others looking at like ways that teams are looking at readdressing their teams, what they need skills-wise, how they're going to go about what transformation is. Get some folks who will rather vocally say, I'm tired of hearing about transformation. I want to hear about the next thing beyond transformation, or complaining about the fact, like, migrating to the cloud is about, cost saving. Talk about the fact that it's more expensive. These are all parts of the things to really discuss going forward.
How can you be tired of saying transformation? We've only said it 68 billion times in the last 10 years. Come on, man.
I got tweeted at pretty hard a couple weeks ago. Somebody's like, I'm sick of digital transformation. Make it stop. Go away.
I feel them in my little world. We've been talking about SPACs a lot, and everyone's really tired of this one financial instrument. And I'm like, I'm sorry. If they'll stop doing things, I'll stop talking about it. But until then, it's transformation, it's SPACs, and we just gotta. I mean, you can't not cover what's going on,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And there's a follow-up. So my clients feel strongly that reskilling in fields will soften the economic blow of COVID-19, and something you've covered recently. Is it a trend you will continue to monitor? Yes, definitely. Even before we got into the pandemic, the idea that the world is changing on various scales and even grander magnitudes, industries, careers were kind of already going away. There are a lot of things that were accelerated by the current events. And the need to change is far reaching. You've got to get down to the roots of people say, well, oh, you lost your job. Well, just go learn to code. I'm like, it's more nuanced. It is more deep than that. You've got people who've been in the IT space for a long time who are looking at, well, I'm used to writing, this programming language. What are the new programming languages that I need to learn and skill up with? I've done a couple of pieces like looking at the legacy tech and coding and that kind of, tech debt, and how, sometimes government entities, incumbents that were reluctant to change, how they've been trying to readdress what they're doing. They've known they need to, digital transformation again, move to the cloud, whatever, how they're going to go about that. But then you have the folks on the inside who are concerned about like, well, I have these skills that don't match with this future, and I want to keep my job and, still eat. So there's that kind of ongoing process, soul searching that folks are doing. And there was a piece I did few months back talking about some organizations that were trying to work out their Cobalt situation because they hadn't looked at it in a long time, but they know that they need to move to something else. And some people were like, well, why can't we still talk about Cobalt? I'm like, because it's not always going to be here, and we've got to move forward. It's going to be an ongoing rolling process. And to relate this actually to being a journalist, I came from the days of newspapers into the interwebs, and that cycle of needing to, change up my skill set, everybody in the media field having to relearn or just like, break into new things, it's going to be an ongoing process. And I think we have to just kind of be prepared for the idea that this is not going to be like, well, I'm going to relearn something now and not have to relearn something, 6 months, 3 months, from now.
Jim, there's a couple of questions there in the queue. Do you want to grab one of them?
Yeah, sure. This is to everybody. Are you at the stage of getting pitch stories, releases that are non-COVID related? It varies. I think for most of the stuff that comes into my my email inbox, it's all COVID related. and I don't pay attention to probably most of it unless I know the people or I know the their contacts or companies that I'm familiar with. Some of the ones, if it's non-cover related, it tends to be for a product or for a company that I've covered extensively, and I might know, have personal contact with the PR people that sort of know that that this may not be directly COVID related, but it's an important update to their product or service or whatever. But but I for sure a lot of the stuff that's coming in over the inbox now is COVID related in some way or another. That's just where we are.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Like, because I cover kind of the businessy side of tech as much as I can, every story is a COVID story to some degree because the pandemic is still ongoing and we're feeling kind of the economic impacts of it. So if people send me over data or whatever, they may not say, here, COVID data, but it's data that's impacted by COVID. So it's hard to kind of parse out what counts as a non-COVID data point or story or whatever, because this is the world that we're still in and will be for probably, I don't know, guys, 10, 12 months, somewhere in there. It's going to be a minute until we can go back outside and not be worried about our fellow person. So, I think it's just going to be the status quo for a long time, sadly. I would love to go do something else than sit at home, but I think I'll just stay here.
Yeah, and I'll say too, in our sort of our editorial meetings and stuff, we go over these topics too, like how enterprise asset management vendors are attacking COVID, things like that. So it's coming from our end too, that we're looking for ways where we can figure out where the technology is helping to deal with some of the issues coming up with COVID.
Laura asked, do you use company-sponsored surveys or data studies, and what type of metrics do we often look for? I don't trust most of them because they seem to come from people who wouldn't have access to enough data to make the claims they're making. But there are a handful of people with whom I've conversed a lot, like people at PitchBook, for example, I know reasonably well. I know how they collect data and how they kind of parse it. So when they send me over data on a certain part of the world, I do nearly always read it because it's a great window into kind of what's happening. But I try to keep a very high bar for that to prevent myself from accidentally regurgitating something to my audience that is untrustworthy. So, there's 4 or 5 people with whom I'll listen to, but most of the answer is no. You want to keep as close to the truth as you can at all times, if not 100%. So you just can't trust everybody who sends you in a spreadsheet.
I do look at surveys and do my vetting and weighing of their overall scope, but there are times where you just definitely have to just and you have to just give a firm no. Give an example. A few months back, I got a pitch about a survey, and it was presenting. I'm trying to remember. It was taking a look at the world and saying which countries deal with the most cyber crimes or hacks or something like that. And the way it kind of really broke out was essentially like the so-called first world countries are doing better, and they pointed out see all of these other countries that were not doing well, that were more open and more victim to that. And I responded back with why I was not going to use that, because it was an echo chamber. It was a confirmation bias. I'm like, great, you said nothing about the fact that the countries that you're saying were doing the best in this arena were all the countries where all the tech leaders are headquartered, where they developed all of these systems that you are trying to say, all these other parts of the world are not doing well. And it's like, well, great, you're just talking about somebody who's had generations of work in that field. And yes, in the future, hopefully things will be a more egalitarian, level playing field, but to not account for that in that survey, and it kind of went over their head because they just thought, hey, we're showing you that these countries aren't doing well with this. And it's like, well, maybe you should think about, where, Oracle is based or IBM is based, and put that context, which was completely absent from what they had presented.
I think it's a good example of data saying lots of things and also saying nothing at the same time.
Yeah, I'll just say we're very skeptical about vendor sponsored surveys in general. We have used them. I have used them sometimes, and I will look at them. But if they're sort of leading to, well, this vendor's solution is the answer, then we don't really go for that.
Let's grab a new one. How does the group feel about companies that made workforce or customer commitments at the start of the pandemic and cannot follow through? Is there a general feeling of forgiveness for brands given the global state of affairs? I'll speak for me. No. Salesforce made so much noise in March about how don't lay off people during COVID, and they just dropped 1,000 people this week. I mean, you can't get plaudits on one hand and then be like, oh, JK, and then expect us not to be relatively rude and dismissive to you because you lied to not just us, but to your employees, and you broke that promise. So I think it looks terrible, and if you can't follow through, shut up. That may have been too harsh. Be quiet. How about that?
Tough love is important. It's very important.
Yeah, I can't add to that. That's
well.
Before you go on, I saw a quick follow-up question about Cobalt, whether or not it's going away. I've interviewed plenty of folks who said that again, like, yes, we love Cobalt. However, the number of folks who are actually still versed in it, how it's actually used. I mean, let's just dial back real quick. The reason why Cobalt got brought up in the particular story that I did was because there are a number of government entities that found themselves flat-footed because they needed to make changes with their unemployment insurance systems, and they realized that they were not ready to cope with the influx. And because of that, they were scrambling to make changes. Yeah, they were exploring how they might try to get, maybe move to the cloud, whatever the updates that they were trying to do, and they realized that they just didn't have anybody around currently active on their teams that understood the underlying, programming language, being Cobalt. It might continue to take more time, and there might be some holdouts going forward, but we are marching toward the time where these organizations are just going to say we are at a point where we cannot continue to use this if we're going to be a going concern. What that might take and how much longer that will take, that remains to be seen. But I think it would be disingenuous for me to say that it's not something that is, in its sunset time.
It also came out in 1960 originally, I think. So maybe we can let it go now. Isn't that a long enough tenure in technology? The iPod only lasted 12 years,
Yeah.
Jim, you want to grab that new one from Megan?
What are the top 3 criteria you're using right now to determine what founders, companies, executives you take interviews right now? Well, for me, I mean, it has to fit into the companies and the industry that I cover. I mean, that's first and foremost. As far as criteria about what the technology is, again, I think it has to be something pretty current. It has to deal with some issues that are top of mind. Obviously COVID is right up there now, and for us, just again, we always have to have some sort of customer tie-in. There has to be some sort of way that this is actual people using this technology and what it can do to to help our users sort of make decisions. If I don't see that, probably not going to pay much attention to it.
JP, how about you?
Yeah, I'm mostly interested in speaking to the person who can talk about the mechanics of what it is we're talking about. I'm admittedly, not the smartest person in the room when I talk to a lot of tech people. So I want to make sure I want to get that smartest, most knowledgeable person from the organization to really relate that, to speak on the technology on a lot of different levels and in different ways. It's fine. I understand that organizations will want to have somebody who's going to be able to repeat, wrote what the boilerplate is and what the messaging is, and that's understandable. But I really want to get past that and get to the nuts and bolts and the nanobots or what have you that are really making this work, because that's what the story is really going to be about. We can get beyond the glamour part of things and have somebody who can kind of really get in there, because I'm trying to get it from the perspective of that IT manager who's reading the story to try and understand why they care about this and what they're going to do with this. If it's something that they're going to possibly, try to bring that into their organization and relate to folks. I'm like, hey, this is why we need to start talking about this, because this person knows what they're talking about. That's what I really look for.
Yeah, I'll throw into that because I think those are both really good answers. That if you ever send an email with expert available, I just ignore it entirely, because if you don't put their name in there, I don't know who they are and I don't care. My readers won't know who they are, and it just isn't a very effective way to send out emails. But one particular interview that I just took this week, actually, so I can give kind of a current example. I've been covering no-code digital transformation. Sorry, JP, and also kind of the recent cloud earnings cycle. And so someone reached out and said, hey, do you want to talk to the CEO of Appian? They're public, they do no code, and they're going through a COVID acceleration. I'm like, yes, that is exactly the person I should be talking to. It intersects all three things that I'm kind of currently working on. So if you nail it, it's the most easiest thing in the world to say yes to. It's just that 99% of pitches and emails and notes and Twitters and DMs of this sort are either too far afield or of someone with whom I just don't think that they're going to be able to offer me what I want. And then it's just not worth kind of anyone's time to kind of get that spun up.
Yeah, I'll just say too, we don't talk to marketing people, and nothing against marketing, but we want to talk to the CEO, the CTO, the CIO, the people that are really doing the actual company bit, and just not marketing.
Another thing I want to throw in real quick before I forget. Personally, I don't see anything under embargo. I don't care. I've got email filters that will automatically bounce your email if you send it to me. And if you get a message that says, please do not respond to this email, because it'll still be bounced, but then people will still respond to that. Again, don't even bother. Don't even try to reword your email to remove the word embargo, but then still try to get me to commit to the embargo, because I've had that trick too. For a multitude of reasons we don't have time for, not interested in that. Also, no, I don't do interviews via email. I'll arrange them, connect, get things rolling, but I need to speak to somebody directly. One of the key things is to have that kind of chance to have the immediate feedback, back and forth, follow-up questions while talking to them. And also, be frank, I don't want something that looks like they, went over it like homework, had a bunch of different people in there to help them draft the most perfect, responses, because I wasn't born last night. I was born tonight, but I wasn't born last night. So I know how that comes together. So definitely don't push an email interview. Want to talk to people live. Want to have that immediacy to follow through and follow up with those questions if something comes up while we're talking.
Yeah, along those lines too, I'll say, if we've set up that interview and they say, well, can you send some questions beforehand? We never do that. Yeah. We have to talk live and get those, like JP was saying, the follow-ups and the answers. And we don't want anyone going in with like a preconceived, answers already there. So no questions in advance.
My solution to that is to never be prepped more than like 20 minutes ahead of time. So people are like a week ahead, like, hey, what are you going to ask them? I'm like, I have absolutely no idea, but I'll figure it out when I prep for that call right before it happens. So sorry. Like, people who plan like 2 weeks in advance blow my mind. How much time do they have? Like, aren't they always frantically trying to keep up? That's how life feels in my desk, at least. It's been a weird year. Megan asked me a question, so I'll grab that. I've said in the past that I'm interested in talking to companies who are deeply impacted by COVID, what their future plans and recovery strategies look like. Many companies are afraid to engage and earn media on these topics. Why should they? Okay, so I'm prepping a panel for a conference that we're having, and I had the CEOs of 3 companies, and we were talking about COVID and how it's affecting their businesses. And they all said, well, COVID's terrible and disease is bad and pandemics are awful, but yes, we are kicking ass right now. And I'm like, okay, cool, I appreciate the throat clearing, but I don't think anyone's going to be super aggressively mean to you if your business is going through a period of growth because people need more of your product during the pandemic. As long as you're not being gross and stamping your foot and saying, oh, look how great we are, pandemics are fantastic, which no one has done. I think you can get away with talking about your business results in kind of a sober tone without quite as much throat clearing as I think we've seen. Though I do understand why companies don't want to accidentally end up in the bad news camp. I think we've seen almost an abundance of caution, maybe in excess of it. On that particular topic. I don't know if you guys have seen similar things in your calls, but I don't need those 8 sentences. I've heard them from everyone else. You know, they're kind of implied at this point. No one's stoked that people are dying, at least not that I've met so far.
Yeah, definitely have not really heard anybody being that morbid, like, yay, hooray. This is, I mean, there are folks who try to find something of a silver lining in terms of, well, you know, these are circumstances, but here's an opportunity we're figuring out from this. But I think I attribute that more to trying to apply their ingenuity to deal with the situation rather than to say, to outright like a vampire, I'm benefiting from what's happening. And, you know.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot. Like, you know, there's no good that's come out of COVID, but you know, this solution has, you know, we've been able to step back and we've been able to look at where our processes are, and that's been a pretty common theme in the last few months.
One thing that's been interesting to watch is how much things have changed since March. You know, if you think about conversations in March, everyone was super scared. And then in April, some companies were like, oh, we're not being hit quite as hard. And then the acceleration kind of picked up for a lot of companies through the digital transformation. And from that point on, there's been a lot of companies that are just really crushing it. So it's been fun to watch people kind of change up their talk tracks. As every month has been a year, I think in 2020 is how I think about it. So there's been enough kind of cycles of change to have a really interesting pattern of communications over the last, what has it been now, 6 months, guys? 5-6 months, something like that. Feels like a longer time.
At least 6 months, I guess. Yeah.
So is it the 8th month? August? This is nearly September now. Man. Yeah, Hannah, you're right. It's been way too long, and yet we're nowhere near finished with this. It's so bad I took up running, which is a mark of how bored I've gotten. Oh, Jim, you want to grab that one first?
I could tell the scoop of engaged. One thing today. I would say, you know, don't send emails to people that you don't know without knowing what they cover. You know, I mean, I'm not going to read something that, you know, has no, you know, if you haven't read what I'm covering, if you can't give me some sort of, you know, hey, I saw your article on this, you know, why don't you consider what I'm going to pitch to you? It's totally worthless. I'm not going to even look at it. So definitely know who you're trying to pitch for sure.
JP?
Relax on the follow-ups. I understand this is a intense time, and a lot of windows have been compressed to see like a return on their efforts. You know, everyone's really, you know, trying to do what they can to show that they're making things happen. However, there are some, you know, rather aggressive folks who will follow up within the day. You know, like that same day, like, hey, I emailed this to you this morning. Did you look at it yet? I mean, I've noticed it more, you know, within the past few months than I have, you know, over the past year or even more. But there's definitely been an uptick of folks who are, I mean, I understand there's a lot more pressure in a lot of different ways, and people are very concerned about making sure that they can show that they are connecting with folks. But the incessant follow-ups that are within, you know, hours, a day, you know, even 2 days, you know, every journalist, as everyone else, needs a chance to digest what you said, if it's worthwhile or not. And not for nothing, to kind of go back to what Jim was saying about whether or not it's something on topic, if you haven't gotten back to, and it's been like, I don't know, a week or two, the follow-up email, I'm like, hey, did you see what I said? I just want to double check. No, we already double checked, and it's not a fit. And it's not to say that the idea is bad, it's just, it's not a fit.
Yeah, I'll add to those two, because apparently we're all going to talk about email, which I think is, you know, symbolic. The way that my friends who work in PR, comms, and marketing work is via email. It is their main tool. It's what they live in. It's how they think. It's how they approach the world. It's what they check first. I couldn't be more the opposite. And so email is the last thing I check. It's the thing that I hate the most. I didn't read any of my emails from Friday, Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday this week. I just marked them all as read and restarted because I was doing my job and not busy in my inbox reading through hundreds of emails from people that may have been interested or not. I had other stuff to do. And so just realizing that we live in very different communications worlds. And so that's often why we don't end up syncing meetings, saying hi or whatever. It's because I'm over here, not to be rude. I'm just like, this is where my job is versus this is where a lot of the PR marketing comms world lives. And that's just a disconnect that I don't think everyone in PR kind of gets. Some journals are great at email. I don't know how the hell they do that, points to them. But I think the rest of us are drowning slowly or have given up entirely, like myself. MK is currently typing if you're on the phone. So the conclusion, the witty end to this is impending as soon as she hits enter, and I'll read it to you.
Do you think maybe if one of us muted, she could be able to get back in real quick?
Oh, yeah. I'll go away again. MK, you're back on.
Yes, there we are. Yay. Alex, thank you so much. Jim and JP, couldn't thank you enough for your time today. Fabulous, engaging conversation. Really, really appreciate it. So sorry about our technical difficulties, but it didn't even phase you guys. So thank you very much. And thank you to everybody who's here and attended. Believe we're going to be putting a recording of this out as well. But just hopefully we'll be able to do this again soon and have everybody just has a fantastic weekend.
Great. Thanks. Thanks for hosting.
Thank you, everybody.